This is about old age. A while ago, I read a book written by a young woman. It was a collection of stories and essays, and the main subject matter, not surprisingly, was what it was like to be young. The future was very important. It dominated all thought, plans, and relationships. The present was considered mostly as a staging area for the future. It was subject to change, that was a given, and so was seen as temporary and of only passing significance. Potential, what's going to be, had precedence over what was. As for the past, very little thought was given to that at all. More recently, I read a book that was, in a way, a companion to that earlier volume. The final chapter, you might say. This was written by an elderly man and was entitled Essays After 80. The man was a writer, a poet, but he said he could no longer write poetry because poetry came from a virile source loaded with testosterone, and that was no longer available to him. But he wanted to keep writing, so he produced these essays. He said they were carefully written and rewritten, some over 80 times. That's a lot of polishing. More casual pieces were redone 30 times. Writing, he said, the mental exercise of it, was his last means of pleasure. The author does his best to look the part of an old man. His picture is on the cover. He has a craggy face, wild long hair, and a wild stringy beard. He looks like what I think an ancient Russian peasant might resemble. Wild, unkempt, almost unimaginably old. And he writes, not surprisingly, about what it is like to be old. It's not much fun, to put it mildly. As he puts it, if anyone is happy, that is proof that they have not yet come to the end of their story. His wife, half his age, died of leukemia. His dog died. Friends and colleagues died. He'll die too, but not yet. He does not think about the future. Tomorrow for him will be very much like today and is therefore not worth thinking about. The present is tedious, painful, frustrating, and full of sleep, lots of naps. So it is the past he writes about the most. The past, memory, is where he is most alive. The past is much more interesting than anything happening now or to come. For the most part, using this man as an example, I think old age brings modesty. Self-deprecation comes naturally and easily to someone who can look back on a life of minor failures, missteps, and outright pratfalls. Sometimes he almost revels in his pathos and inadequacies. Thankfully, he did not dwell on inconstancy. And if you have been reading poems in public for 50 years and signing books, teaching classes, and taking questions, there's a good chance you have several signature anecdotes to share, perhaps a solid story or two. Old age is a process of constriction. You become less and less capable of getting around, your legs weaken, hips, knees, and ankles object, your sense of balance is off, and you need a cane, a handrail, a walker, and then a wheelchair. After a number of fender benders, he had to surrender his driver's license, causing him to break down and weep. His world continues to shrink. He grows his beard, rewrites his essays, has aches and pains, and sits in a blue armchair by a window, looking out at as much of the world as he can see. He still smokes cigarettes, but he drops them and can't find them, so he stops smoking in bed, but continues to smoke in the chair until he sets it on fire, setting off the smoke alarm, and the firemen come, carry the fuming chair out to the front yard, where they hose it down, and they leave, but an ember causes it to reignite, and when the firemen return, they cut it up with their axes. They may as well be chopping him and his life. Years before, he made love, won awards, traveled extensively, toured through famous museums all over the world, picked up women at readings, wrote some books on the old family, homestead, and baseball, as well as poetry. Now that poetry is gone. His life is literally prosaic, and that must suffice. As for that life, such as it is, what remains is the beard, the rewriting, watching baseball games on TV, looking out the window from another chair, memory, and death. And death, at this point, is almost like a companion.